Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 1v1 series, a series where we pit two DBD killers against one another based on stats and our 6 categories: strength, agility, stealth, power, resistance and intelligence, to decide which one would come out victorious. Strength is an assessment of the killer's physical strength, agility is an assessment of how quickly they can move and strike their weapon, stealth is how stealthy they are, power is how effective or strong their power is, resistance is their ability to resist incoming direct attacks, and intelligence is an assessment of how smart or resourceful they are. With these scores and my own reasoning for each of the numbers, we will decide who I think would likely win in a 1v1 fight. I'm going to try and be as objective as possible and be without any bias. If you didn't know, this series is becoming a bit of a tournament. Here's the table so far for the first elimination round. The goal of this series being a search for the strongest killer in the game. Today we are seeing who would win in a 1v1 fight, the Nightmare or the Plague. Here's what you guys thought. Let's get into it. Strength is our first category, and one which I don't believe either of our contenders really excel in particularly, as I personally don't feel they have any physically defining features that show strength. There is possibly an argument that Plague would be stronger than Freddy, as she is far taller and also wields a heavy looking sensor, which she swings with ease. I'm definitely inclined to think that Plague is the stronger of the two here, although how much stronger is hard to guess. I do think there is an argument for variations in strength. During the fight there could be changes, such as if they go into the dream world or if Plague managed to infect Freddy. Both of these would result in a strength buff or a weakening to their opponent. Along with this, both the state of sickness and the dream world are fairly easy to inflict, so I think we can apply these to the overall scores. So we're giving Freddy and Plague both a 6. Pretty average, but generally they're just regular people. Even if they inflict sickness or the dream world on one another, they will effectively just cancel each other's strength out. That's my take on it at least. Maybe a little controversial for the scoring there, but I think they're pretty even. Okay, on to agility. I imagine both of our contenders are going to be quite agile, as neither are really restricted by anything. Despite their lack of protective clothing, they do have clothing that lets them move freely and utilize their weapon in a preferable way. There is some restriction for Freddy in that his weapon is always attached to his hand, so if you were to pin down his hand, he basically no longer has a weapon and he's just a guy if he's not inside the dream world. However, he does gain points in that his weapon is very quick moving for this same factor of being attached to his hand. It means he can potentially strike it the fastest out of anyone because it's effectively an extension to his own body. Plague loses points also for the factor that she can't strike her weapon particularly quickly, and at that it's a restrictive weapon. A sensor isn't even really meant to be a weapon, and she's using it instead more like a mace or something. I think overall, due to the Plague's awkward to use ability as well as weapon, she is going to score a 6, redeemed slightly by her lack of bodily restrictions in what she's wearing and her great posture. I do think for Freddy we should take into account the perk Fire Up, as it kind of hints at the idea that the more angry Freddy gets, the stronger and also quicker he becomes. So although it wouldn't be direct agility, it might be agility that could slowly be gained through the course of the fight. Furthermore, Freddy also has his teleport, which I wouldn't quite say is agile, but it definitely does allow for some quick movement. So I think overall we're giving Freddy an 8. He mainly gets points over Plague here because of her lack of agility when using her weapon. When swinging at Freddy, she's also going to need to kind of lean down as she does it. So Freddy gets the benefit here, I think. Okay, now we're on to stealth. We can actually account for some stealth when it comes to Plague, as she has her perk Dark Devotion, which can allow you to sneak up unheard after hitting the obsession. This is pretty situational, and I'm not too sure how effective it would realistically be in a 1v1, but regardless, it's something to keep in mind. I do think though that the Plague isn't that stealthy aside this. When she attacks you, you can hear her charging up her vomit. She's always whispering to herself as well, and she's quite tall and she can be seen easily from a distance, none of which make her very stealthy. So again, I think about a 6 for Plague, a bit above average, as she does have the potential to utilize Dark Devotion for some deception. Freddy, on the other hand, has quite a plethora of different tools for being stealthy, his main one being the dream world, in which it becomes very hard to discern the direction in which he is approaching from. It also becomes hard because he's intermittently invisible, so there's that. Furthermore, he has the capability to teleport and therefore sneak up behind people, and also we can give him some credit with his fake pallets, which kind of give a stealth factor. Overall, I think he gets a 9. He doesn't get a perfect score, as when in the dream world there is still the lullaby that can be heard, which does at least notify you when he's in the area. So I think a 9 here is pretty fair. Okay, in regards to power. For the power category, it's going to be a little bit difficult to rank, as arguably these two killers have the best powers in the game, at least in terms of a 1v1 situation. Freddy's ability to pull someone into the dream world and Plague's ability to almost instantly infect them with a deadly plague are both very strong abilities. The main issue I have with Plague's ability, although very strong, is that it's quite restrictive in a 1v1, as it's more of a build-up power than it is an instantly dangerous power, although I still think it would be one of the best. I think because it can still be so dangerous, if it is managed to be implemented though, I'm still going to give it a solid 8, which I think is fair. It's a deadly plague at the end of the day. Freddy, I'm going to give a 9. Out of Dreamworld, he isn't powerful, but in the Dreamworld, he is going to be kind of insane. So a 9, I think. He's invisible, can teleport, and can use snares to slow down his opponent. It's a strong power for sure. Okay, onto resistance. As I said before, neither of our characters have particularly protective clothing, and neither look to have overly thick or stronger skin, so they're both just two people. It seems to me that either of these characters would take a fair amount of damage if they were to get struck by Freddy's clawed glove or Plague sensor. I think both would do considerable harm. I do however think that there is some value in looking at the two killers' powers. In the lore we find out that to save one of her followers, the Plague cuts off one of her own toes as an offering to the gods. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that she's instantly very resilient, but I think it's worth considering this as something to comment on, as not everyone can just cut off a toe and happily continue living, especially in a time when medicine would be quite poor. Furthermore, we find out that Plague herself had the plague, as you would imagine, and she managed to survive with it for a long while, travelling a considerable distance to try and save her followers. I think for all these reasons I actually want to give her a resistance of 8. I think if she's resisted all she has the potential to resist Freddy and the Dreamworld somewhat. For Freddy we're going to give him a resistance of 7 due to the fact that out of Dreamworld he's kind of just a guy, but within the Dreamworld he's pretty much immortal, I think. This number is definitely dampened by the fact that out of the Dreamworld, Freddy is far weaker though. This is why I feel he has to be bang in the middle at 7. Okay, so for intelligence. There is not much to go off in my opinion when it comes to their intelligence. I think because of the Plague's success and her quick rise to power within the lore, from being no one to being a priestess, is very impressive, and definitely shows her to have a good level of intelligence. She seems to know what will please the gods, and does almost everything she can to do so. Within her time, she would have been revered almost like a god herself, so I think we have to pin her intelligence quite highly. On the other hand, Freddy is just a regular guy really, with nothing to indicate a good level of intelligence. There's maybe an argument for him being intelligent in the way he tortures people's dreams, using their different fears and such. I think that's a fair thing to say. I'm going to give Freddy a 6 and Plague an 8. I think that's fair given both their circumstances. I just feel personally Plague has done a little bit more to prove her intelligence. Freddy seems fairly average in his intelligence, only higher because of his cleverness in how he tortures people. Just kinda messed up. So, this brings the final scores to 45 to Freddy and 42 to Plague. So, Freddy wins. This means he will be moving on to the next round and fighting against last week's winner in the second heat. Alright, and now it is time for the description of the fight. The streets of Springwood are calm as a thin mist begins to rise from behind the trees, covering the road. The Plague stands in the road, unfamiliar with where she could be. She whispers to herself. As she does, a slow hum can be heard in the distance, coming from the school. A quiet and calm song. All of a sudden she hears bubbling. She swings around and her eyes catch a generator. It's bubbling over, blood pouring from the pistons as a figure rises from the ground. It stands there. A nightmare. Freddy raises his clawed glove and chuckles to himself. The Plague stares back, fearless. Freddy swings with his clawed glove. As he does, the Plague swings her sensor too. Freddy's claws locked into the sensor's gaps with a metallic clang. The Plague jumped at the opportunity, twisting the chain round his arm and restricting his clawed hand. She then slammed the sensor into his face. The fumes coming from it crinkled at the newly cut skin. The Plague opened her mouth, a stream of vomit surging from her and splattering over Freddy. He retched, reaching his hand out. He prepared to channel a projection. He disappeared. The Plague now held nothing. She could feel her head beginning to dip though. The sound of a far-off lullaby began again, slowly getting closer. Freddy appeared behind her, slashing down her back. The Plague tried to swing at him, but by the time she did, he was gone. She could hear his footsteps though. She waited patiently for the next attack. This time Freddy appeared right in front of her. His claws raised, he slashed the Plague's face, making her headpiece topple off. The Plague screamed in agony, hurling her sensor, slamming it into Freddy. He fell. She stared into the sensor's flames. She needed to wake up. She reached in and burned her hand and woke instantaneously. She could feel herself weakening from the wounds. She stood, staring around frantically to find where the nightmare had gone. Before she could react, she felt the claws puncture through her, piercing her heart. She fell down with a thud. Freddy looked on, the sickness slowly eating away at him. It was done. Alright, and that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Thanks, and goodbye.